August 3rd, 1945. Ulithi Atoll, the Western Pacific. A Japanese submarine commander raises his periscope through tropical waters. He sees something that makes him question his own sanity. Floating beside the American fleet is a concrete barge, 300 feet long, no weapons, no armor. Its sole purpose, its only function, its entire reason for existing in a war zone 7,000 miles from home is to manufacture ice cream, 20 gallons per minute, 24 hours per day, served to crews who had, just that morning, bombed Japanese positions into ash. The submarine commander, his name lost to history, his report declassified in 1963, did not fire. He submerged. He retreated. And in his after-action report, he wrote a single sentence. "We are not fighting an enemy. We are fighting a different species." This is not a story about ice cream. It is a story about industrial capacity, weaponized as psychological warfare. It is about the moment when warfare stopped being a contest of courage or tactics and became a simple, crushing equation of production. And it is about a single, floating, concrete box that did more damage to Japanese morale than a dozen aircraft carriers. Not by killing, but by existing. The strategic mathematics of the Pacific War in 1945 were brutally simple. Japan was losing. Not in battles, but in resources. Its pilots flew missions on empty stomachs. Its ships operated on recycled fuel. Its soldiers, on remote garrisons, ate tree bark and waited for supply runs that would never come. Malnutrition was not an unfortunate side effect of war. It was the central reality of the Japanese war effort. Starvation was strategy. On Iwo Jima, in the sulfur-stinking volcanic tunnels carved from black rock, Japanese soldiers performed rituals of desperation. One Marine patrol discovered an enemy position where men had been licking condensation off rusted steel beams. Not for comfort, for survival. Water was no longer a resource. It was a god. In those tunnels, a single cup of stagnant rainwater was worth more than ammunition. Men with skin stretched tight over bone would press their tongues against damp stone, harvesting moisture, one drop at a time. American forces discovered Japanese defenders surviving on rice mixed with sawdust. On Okinawa, medical examiners reported that 40% of Japanese casualties showed signs of severe malnutrition before they were killed in combat. In the Solomon Islands, entire garrisons were found dead, not from bullets, but from beriberi, a disease of vitamin deficiency. The Japanese supply chain had not broken down. It had simply never existed at the scale required. The average Japanese soldier in the Pacific Theater received 1,500 calories per day, on paper. In reality, most received less than 1,000. The average American soldier received 4,758 calories per day. So much food that Army quartermasters filed reports about waste. American soldiers complained about the monotony of their rations. Japanese soldiers wrote final letters home describing the taste of grass. Against this backdrop of scarcity, the United States Navy deployed what may be the most psychologically devastating weapon in the history of naval warfare: abundance. So excessive, it became obscene. But this is not just a story about a concrete barge or Pentagon strategy. This is the story of a single lieutenant, a man who committed what the Navy would call theft, what his men would call genius, and what history would call the foundation of a billion-dollar empire. A man who traded a stolen Jeep for a forbidden freezer in the dead of night, who turned tropical fruit and contraband sugar into weapons of war, who understood something the generals never wrote in their manuals, that the real battle was not for islands or supply lines, but for the will to keep fighting when everything else had been stripped away. His name was Burt Baskin. Before he became a household name on 10,000 storefronts, he was a criminal, an artist, and a warrior who fought with cream and sugar instead of bullets and steel. But before we get to his story, you need to understand the machine he was up against and the machine he would learn to exploit. The ice cream barge, officially designated IX-511, unofficially called the Churn, was commissioned in May 1945. It was not a ship. It was a factory, built from concrete because steel was needed elsewhere, towed into position because it had no engines, It existed for one purpose: to produce frozen dessert at industrial scale for fighting men in tropical heat. Its specifications read like the fever dream of a logistician gone mad. Capacity: 1,500 gallons per shift. Flavors: a rotating selection of 10, including pineapple, coconut, and something optimistically called tropical surprise. Refrigeration: powered by a generator large enough to cool a small town. Personnel: 32, including 2 Navy-trained ice cream specialists, transferred from a Milwaukee dairy. The construction alone was an act of industrial theater. While Japan was melting down temple bells for copper, the United States was pouring 2,000 tons of concrete into a barge, whose only military value was comfort, while Japanese engineers were designing bamboo fighter planes. Because aluminum was unavailable, American engineers were calculating the optimal temperature for soft serve in 95-degree heat. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal gave the project a priority rating, higher than some ammunition types. He authorized $1 million, $17 million in today's currency, for a single floating freezer. The decision was not frivolous, it was strategic. The Pentagon had reached a conclusion that sounds like a joke, but was deadly serious. Ice cream was a strategic necessity. The calculus of steel explained everything. By 1945, the United States was outproducing the world. They were building ships faster than the Japanese could sink them. But morale was a different kind of engine. The island hopping campaign was a meat grinder. Men were rotting from the inside out, with tropical diseases, and what the medical corps called the stare. A man with the stare had stopped seeing. He moved, he followed orders, but behind his eyes was nothing but static. Ice cream brought men back. Not completely, not permanently, but for 5 minutes. A man with a cold treat in his hand could forget. He was 10,000 miles from home, but the IX-511 was not alone. It was the flagship of an entire fleet of pleasure. Alongside it floated a beer barge, capable of producing 1,000 cases per day, a soda fountain barge, with 8 stations serving ice cream floats and milkshakes, a barge dedicated exclusively to brewing fresh coffee, 60 gallons per hour, of percolated, never instant caffeine. There was even a floating bakery, producing 1,500 pies daily, including a lemon meringue that required fresh eggs flown in from Hawaii. The United States Navy had looked at the logistical challenge of projecting power across the largest ocean on Earth, and determined that force multiplication required not just bombs and bullets, but banana splits, and this was only what floated. On aircraft carriers, ice cream machines were standard equipment. A typical Essex-class carrier had freezers capable of producing 200 gallons per day, 1 gallon for every 10 men aboard. Battleships had soda fountains installed between gun turrets. Submarines returning from patrol were greeted with ice cream socials. The Navy had turned dessert into doctrine. To make ice cream at this scale required 3 things that were extinct in the Japanese Navy: massive amounts of electricity for refrigeration, tons of refined sugar, and most importantly, unlimited fresh water. While a Japanese captain was rationing a single cup of stagnant water to his entire, he could look through his binoculars and see an American tugboat towing a concrete factory that used thousands of gallons of fresh water just to keep a strawberry mix at the perfect temperature. This was not just a snack, it was a declaration of total economic victory. The man who turned this peculiar strategy into personal legend was not an admiral, not a general. He was a 24-year-old Navy lieutenant named Burt Baskin. Baskin's qualification for his role in this story was singular. Before the war, he had managed an ice cream parlor in Glendale, California. His talent was not tactical, it was textural. He understood ice cream the way a violinist understands vibration, as a technical problem, with an emotional solution. In the brutal heat of the Pacific, ice cream was not dessert, it was hope, in a waxed paper cup. Born in 1913, Baskin grew up in the ice cream business. His father owned a small dairy in Chicago. Young Burt learned to operate a hand crank freezer at age 7. By 15, he could diagnose problems in a refrigeration compressor by sound alone. By 20, he was managing his own shop. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, He enlisted, not out of patriotic fervor, but pragmatic certainty. The war would happen with or without him, and at least the Navy fed you. The problem was storage. Baskin's supply ship, the USS Antares, had no ice cream freezer. The nearest source was an aircraft carrier, 40 miles away. Even then, the ice cream would melt during transport. For 3 months, Baskin watched men suffer in 110-degree heat, while perfectly good ice cream sat frozen and unreachable on distant ships. For 3 months, he watched the Navy's abundance fail the simplest test: distribution. He began plotting. The ship's motor pool had 3 jeeps, one reserved for the captain, one for shore operations. The third sat unused, waiting for a mission that never came. Meanwhile, Baskin learned through scuttlebutt that the carrier USS Lexington had taken on 4 new ice cream freezers. It needed to offload the old ones to make space. The mathematics were elegant. The Jeep was worth approximately $1,200 in 1945 currency. The freezer was technically Navy property, and therefore priceless. But the carrier's supply officer did not need a freezer. He needed ground transport. Baskin needed a freezer more than the Antares needed a 3rd Jeep. That nobody drove. The trade was made in the dark. In a move that mirrored pirate traditions, a working party of 6 sailors, bribed with promises of first access to his ice cream, used the ship's crane to hoist the 400-pound freezer aboard the Antares. By morning, it was installed in a storage compartment below decks, connected to the ship's electrical system, and producing its first batch, vanilla, because Baskin had not yet secured the ingredients for anything more ambitious. He committed what some would call a logistical crime. He traded a military jeep, government property, serial numbered, tracked, and very much not his to give away, for equipment that technically did not exist on his inventory list. It was barter. It was theft. It was brilliant. With that freezer, Baskin became a battlefield chemist. He experimented with local ingredients: papaya from the Philippines, mango from island trades, guava gathered during shore leave, coconut milk when regular milk ran short. He hand-cranked test batches in his bunk, bribed the ship's cook for sugar rations, traded cigarettes for vanilla extract. Slowly, methodically, he developed something the Navy's industrial ice cream could never match: flavors that tasted like somewhere other than war. His first original creation: pineapple coconut, too icy. The texture was wrong. But the men who tasted it did not care about texture. They cared that it tasted like something fresh, something alive, something that had not been processed in a factory in Pennsylvania and frozen for 6 months. His second attempt: mango with a hint of lime. Better, smoother. The acidity of the lime cut through the sweetness, creating a complexity Navy-issue vanilla could never approach. Word spread. Men began appearing at the storage compartment during off hours, asking if the ice cream lieutenant had anything new. Baskin's reputation spread, ship to ship. Men who had not smiled in months lined up for his tropical concoctions. Officers who should have court-martialed him instead requested transfers to the Antares. The ship's morale, previously middling, became the highest in the task force. Re-enlistment rates climbed. Disciplinary incidents dropped. All because a lieutenant was making ice cream in a storage closet. Baskin did not see himself as a morale officer, but in a war of attrition, morale was ammunition, and he was manufacturing it, 20 gallons at a time. On May 8th, 1942, the USS Lexington, the same carrier that would later provide Baskin with his freezer, was sinking in the Coral Sea. Torpedoes and bombs tore through her hull. Fires raged below decks. The order to abandon ship had been given. Most men scrambled for life jackets, checked their Mae Wests, prepared to slide down ropes into the oily water below. But a group of sailors remembered one thing: the freezer. They knew the ice cream, gallons and gallons of chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry would be lost forever. And in a moment of surreal, calm defiance, these men did not run for the lifeboats. They broke into the galley. They did not have bowls. The galley was already flooding. Plates had been smashed, utensils scattered. So they used the only vessels left, their M1 combat helmets. As the ship listed at 30 degrees, with fire licking the flight deck above and explosions echoing through the hull. These men sat on steel plates of the galley floor, filling their helmets with scoops of chocolate and vanilla. They ate calmly. Some laughed. Dark humor. In the face of annihilation, they waited until the very last moment, until the water was ankle deep, and the deck groaning, before sliding down ropes into the Pacific. One survivor later said, quote, "We wanted to go out with the taste of home in our mouths, not the taste of salt." End quote. Imagine being a Japanese pilot flying overhead. You have just landed a devastating blow. You have sunk a multi-million-dollar carrier, a crown jewel of the American fleet. You bank your zero to survey the damage. And through your canopy, you see the Americans eating. They are not panicked. They are not broken. They are treating the loss of a flagship like a Sunday picnic. What do you report when you return to your carrier? That the enemy is defeated? Or that the enemy does not care? This was the psychological fracture. The realization, America's industrial capacity was so vast, its resources so deep, that even catastrophic loss was met with ice cream. The Japanese had been taught to revere sacrifice, to embrace death with honor, but the Americans seemed to approach death with dessert. Japanese lookouts filed reports that commanders refused to believe. Barges full of ice cream, destroyers towing floating soda fountains, fleet tenders whose manifests listed chocolate syrup, and maraschino cherries alongside torpedoes and aviation fuel. To the Japanese Naval Command, these reports seemed like propaganda, or madness, or lies. Because if they were true, then the war was not simply lost, it was over. It had perhaps always been over. A declassified Japanese intelligence report from July 1945 reads, quote, "Enemy logistics appear to include non-essential recreational supplies in quantities exceeding our essential medical supplies. This suggests either a deception operation or a productive capacity beyond our ability to comprehend. No tactical response is recommended because no tactical response exists." End quote. That phrase, "no tactical response exists," appears again and again in Japanese naval documents from the final months of the war. It was not defeatism, it was arithmetic. You cannot sink morale with torpedoes. You cannot bomb away the fact that your enemy is eating ice cream while you are eating seaweed. After the war, Burt Baskin returned to California with a duffel bag full of recipe notes, written on moisture-stained paper. In 1946, he partnered with his brother-in-law, Irvine Robbins, who shared his obsession with ice cream. Together, they opened a small ice cream shop in Glendale, California, 900 square feet, 6 employees, a freezer that Baskin rebuilt himself because he did not trust anyone else to maintain proper temperature. Their concept was simple, revolutionary, and born directly from Baskin's Pacific experiments, 31 flavors, one for every day of the month, tropical fruits, unexpected combinations. Ice cream is adventure, not just refreshment. The first flavors included pineapple coconut, his first Pacific experiment, mango lime, perfected over dozens of attempts in a war zone, and battle stations, a chocolate coffee combination for overnight watch crews. Baskin-Robbins became an empire. By 1960, 400 stores. By 1970, 1,000. Today, over 8,000 locations in 50 countries. But Baskin rarely spoke about the war. When he did, he told stories of heat, thirst, and the strange alchemy of turning military surplus into something that made men remember they were human. He never mentioned the Jeep, never mentioned that his tropical flavors were developed in a war zone while men died a few miles away. He understood, perhaps before anyone, that the most powerful weapon is not the one that kills the enemy. It is the one that makes the enemy realize they have already lost. Burt Baskin died in 1967, wealthy and quiet, 54 years old. The ice cream barge was scrapped in 1947. Its concrete hull, used as foundation material for a naval station in Guam. No plaque, no memorial. But in the Japanese naval archives, in reports filed by submarine commanders and intelligence officers, the ice cream barge is everywhere, a floating proof of American abundance, a concrete monument to the terrible, suffocating realization this war was not a fight, it was a harvest. And Japan had already been reaped. The final irony, ice cream, was a weapon precisely because it was not a weapon. It could not be targeted, or sunk, or defeated. It simply existed, absurd and untouchable. You can shoot down planes, you can sink ships, but you cannot sink morale, born from the knowledge that somewhere, someone is eating butter pecan while you are dying of thirst. This was not the cruelty of combat. This was the cruelty of contrast. And contrast, in war, is the most devastating weapon of all. Lieutenant Burt Baskin traded a Jeep for a freezer and built an empire. The United States Navy built a barge that made ice cream and broke an enemy's will. Somewhere in the archives, a Japanese submarine commander's report still asks the question that no amount of courage could answer. Quote, "How do you fight a nation that wages war with ice cream?" End quote. You do not. You surrender. And you try, in the decades that follow, to forget the taste of despair. That comes from knowing your enemy never even considered you hungry. Next time you see a Baskin-Robbins sign, remember the Lady Lex. Remember the men eating ice cream out of their combat helmets as their ship sank beneath them. Remember the Japanese soldiers licking condensation from steel beams in volcanic tunnels. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield is not a bomb or a bullet. Sometimes it is a scoop of vanilla.